Morning, everybody. Gonna have another talk on my way to the SCAB picket, the SCAB fabrication facility here in Edmonton, Alberta. Just delete all that. Good morning, everybody. I'm on my way to the SCAB fabrication facility where our 146 is picketing because we've been locked out by the employer. They've locked us out on unreasonable contract negotiations. We've had an expired contract for almost 2 years, and they don't want to, of course they didn't want to settle, but now Amanda Hawkins, she's a billionaire, she wants to press unreasonable social and benefit reductions. That's pension and your health welfare funding, right? Which to lock employees out and use replacement workers is illegal in the United States, as well as Quebec here in Canada and British Columbia. No such law, even though it's in the Declaration of Human Rights that every country in the world that's in the UN has signed on to. It was a promise made to the Allies in World War II. But apparently that doesn't apply in Canada. We're a pretty scabby country. So, you know, they talk about third world, but it looks like that. My talk this morning on my way to the picket is to explain, and first I want to say Black Lives Matter, African Americans, African Canadians, and just African descendants around the world. I apologize for what I must do today and what we're going to go through. I know with George Floyd and what happened with those Dixie Democrat pigs, cops trained to kill blacks. There's over 62 cases. This isn't something that's fake. It's a reality in the United States for sure. Canada, we have the similar problems, but it's First Nations. You guys have the American Indian, we have the First Nations. I see that sun's really bright there. Don't know how that's coming out with the camera, but maybe I gotta move this here. I don't know if that'll help. Nah, no, too bad. Anyhow, we're gonna get into some pretty serious stuff. It's not talked about in any mainstream, but I have to up my game this morning with the SCABs. And I have to go into these details, so I don't want to be painted as a racist, which if anyone looks me up on Google, that's happened to me before, and it's not valid. My children are mixed. I married into mixed nationality relationship, as well as other family members of mine that I'm not going to speak of, and then I have sister-in-laws which are Jamaican, so you know, it's my family. The racism thing has never really been an issue in any extent. We're pretty liberalized that way. Multicultural family. My parents I grew up with were really accepting. They taught us to be loving, accepting for people for who they are, not the color of their skin or their race and everything else. But that all being said, I want to go on as well to talk to people who've been sexually abused, specifically in childhood. I'm sorry again for what I'm going to do today and what we're going to get into. It's going to get pretty heated, and again, it's going to be because of what I'm going to go through with the SCABs. But first, I'm going to give you some background history, and like I said, I'm sorry, but I have to use this stuff. We have to go through it so people know where the SCAB come from, what is a SCAB, and the history of that. So, and everybody hears that term SCAB. What is a SCAB? Well, in North America, I mean, we can go back to ancient Egypt, we can go through history of slavery throughout the world, but I'm going to focus on North America because that's where I'm in, North America. And you know, when we get into that wealthy elite, especially the inherited generational family wealth, massive 0.001% wealth transferred to what people like to refer to as that white privilege, and it's used so loosely now. And I know that inherited wealthy elite, the one that's caused so much problems in North America, that's what we have to target here, not the average person. But I mean, there's that too, but what we're going into is pretty deep. So I'm going to start at the very beginning in history, and we're going to get into Malcolm X. I like to call him Dr. Malcolm X because he was way ahead of his time. He was an American separatist too, in a different type of separation. He wanted to take the African American and separate them from the USA at the time. And specifically, I'm referring to November 10th, 1963. He gave an incredible speech about the house Negro, the plantation Negro, the two types of slaves. And that house Negro is our modern day SCAB, okay? The house nigger. And you're gonna hear me in the next video, as I call it, the SCABs on that, and I lay reference, and it has to be done, it has to be explained. So I'm gonna give you, the public, the background into it. So that speech in 1963 to the grassroots African Americans, November 10th, Malcolm X talks about that. And he goes into some serious detail that doesn't get revisited till several decades after his death by academics, doctorates, massive articles and research written about it, and I'm going to go into that. But he was the first to really touch base on it, and he utilized it. That wealthy elite, these slave masters, and how they programmed through exploitation of the slaves. They had their house Negroes who were mostly sexually abused, the women and men, the boys young. That wealthy elite grabbed those slaves out of the plantation fields. They grabbed young boys, young girls, and brought them up in the house. And that was done through sexual exploitation more often than not. In the Deep South, you can look at many articles written on this, transcending from the 1700s all the way through the late 1800s or late 1860s of what they did. And this was pretty massive throughout the Deep South and slave America. And it was plantation Negroes were not wearing pants, the young boys not to wear pants. The men were put in dresses. This is reality. You can look it up. Anyone can Google research this stuff. It was to emasculate the master, the plantation owner, that inherited wealth, that evil that they brought from generation to generation. They'd exploit the boys, they would exploit the girls, obviously. Much more is written about that, but there is Richard Gardner, who wrote considerable amount, and we get into the modern day SCAB and how this elite was using. We see it with Epstein. It's not about sex, it's about power and control. It's about a wealthy group taking the power out of the third class, mostly citizen, or in the early times when we go back to slavery, it was those that they could emancipate, emasculate the men, and control the women. And Malcolm X went into how the house Negro just loved his master, okay? And that's what the SCAB is. They themselves have been, in modern times, were, as Dr. Richard Gardner goes through, he says, that these emasculated children, they go on in life to become adults from sexual abuse, and they're easily exploited. Lots of them. So when you get into the SCAB and you can read the research papers, these men, and it's specifically men that are just gravitate to exploitation, and that's what we're seeing here. And Amanda Hawkins has grabbed 5 of them. So they say statistically in North America, 1 in 6 males has been sexually assaulted at some point in their life, as children. and this is about the 1/6 of that shop shift, where you have those men who are emasculated, and they go to their master. It doesn't matter what she presents them or how much abuse. They're going to stick with her, and they're going to take whatever abuse she throws at them, because it's a trigger, and they don't know how to man up. They don't know, and it was what the House Negro was. It's what Malcolm X referred to in his 1963 speech. They're all around us today. He just didn't have the term SCAB. And I mean, I understand, from Dr. Richard Gartner's lots of work, and there's many papers from other doctors too, but when you go into Richard Gartner, and that's American psychology, and he's up there, and he goes into that, and we get right into what the SCAB is. So that's the history of the SCAB, why they exist, why they want to be exploited, because 96% of the time the SCAB comes from sexual abuse, exploitation as a child, and they've grown up and they don't know anything else. You know what I mean? It's not every person who's been sexually abused is going to end up that way, but when you deal with the SCAB, generally 96% of them, over 96%, were sexually exploited as children. These wealthy elites, they target those in the workforce under their employment. When you think about that, out of 100 employees, you're going to find 4 like that, or you're going to find probably, it's more like 14%, that could end up like that. And even if they get half of that, they got quite the little force. And we have a few guys across the line, they're the ultimate SCAB, and chances are they've been exploited. So I'm heading out to Cesco now. I'm going to get there, and we're going to go through that. So you're going to hear a lot of reference to that, and of course the cussing and the references made are going to be pretty disturbing in the next video. But I just wanted to get that history out there for everybody to understand what the SCAB is, where they come from, what all the research is into the SCAB, and why they do what they do. And just so everybody knows, there was a vote presented, a decertification vote, and overwhelming majority voted no. So these SCABs that are crossing the picket and that are going with the employer in violation of democracy, democratic rights, and it wasn't just a narrow margin here. It was a rather large margin. Like any normal human being, if you don't want to be union, you just quit. Being a SCAB, non-union, union, there's always been that divide. I've worked in both sides. I had my successes in both, and and I'm back in a union environment again, and I've been in this local for quite a number of years, and I don't plan on going anywhere. But you join a union, you accept their rules, their conditions. We all swore an oath. So when you do that, you take all the perks, the privileges that were hard fought for, and then when the time comes for you to stand up and you turn tail and you go the other way and you backstab, betray your brothers and sisters, especially when a democratic vote was held and by a massive majority they voted one way and you couldn't accept it, so you go with the employer side. When you had a simple choice, you can always quit, right? There's always another job to go to if you want that environment or you don't like the environment. But even non-union, I know in contract there's a set bar of wages and benefits and retirement packages, and they're not even that great always, and we're in real tough times. It's not the time to be doing what we're doing now. If that shop, Cesco, is no longer viable, which seems to be the case with Amanda Hawkins, from what we've seen, she's really stripped it. She stripped the management, took away the competency, messed up with the engineering, sold off great chunks of specialty work and tooling and equipment. And we're not talking small scale stuff either, right? Pretty rare stuff that her father amassed to complete the jobs that they have to complete, not easily found. And she sold a lot of that off, stripped it down, as she's been doing for the last couple of years. So if her intention is to shut the shop down, and these guys must know it, everybody else has that suspicion and knows it, and you know, why would they do what they're doing, right? Why are they, you know, going for the throat here? And it's because they've been emasculated. It's hard to explain, but it goes back to the house Negro, and it's the modern day SCAB, and that's the house Negro in North American literature, and that's where we're at. But I guess that's it for now. I'm going to do a really hairy, highly elevated video here. It's going to be pretty brutal, and we're going to see what the scabs do. But we have to do something, because doing nothing is only going to be the end of many people's pensions, you know. And you look, SESCO would just be the start for Alberta. It's a real attack by that elite that's going to try and end unions in the roughest time in Alberta's modern history since the 80s, and maybe since World War II. And we're very close to even topping that in the Great Depression. So things can get really ugly here. They're going to get ugly today, I'm sure. And I just wanted to explain myself and where the history comes from, because I'm going to be hitting really hard today, and you know, I'm going to be provoking a response from the other side. We're going to see if we can't settle some issues today. So thanks everybody for watching. I'm sorry I'm driving. It's hard for me to, you know, get into real good detail, but that's the explanation. I know it's a little windy. Thank you. Stay tuned for the big video here. It's going to get hairy.